Keeping It Real with Jillian Michaels.
All right, team. Welcome to Keeping It Real. Today, I want to be speaking to you directly about a bombshell in the Epstein files. It seems we, in fact, do have proof of pandemic planning with Bill Gates and Jeffrey Epstein. I've gone on a deep dive. I've gone all the way down the rabbit hole, and it's going to absolutely blow your frickin' mind. So the bottom line is that I think we are all past the point of pretending that when the richest, most powerful people on earth get together, they have anyone's best intentions in mind except their own. And of course, they wrap it in language like global good and philanthropy, and they stage it at Davos, and they parade it through initiatives like the Clinton Global Initiative. But what they're really doing is consolidating money and power, and it certainly appears this is how the blueprint for the world's pandemic response actually originated. Not in a Wuhan wet market in 2020, but nearly a decade earlier, when a convicted billionaire sex trafficker and a pervert billionaire with a God complex tried to corner the market on global biosecurity using the threat of a plague to get it. And according to the emails, this wasn't even Gates' idea initially. It was Epstein's. Behold. Please find attached a draft agenda for the meeting on preparing for pandemics as requested. Let's discuss next steps. For example, how to officially involve the World Health Organization and the ICRC, i.e. co-branding. Best regards, and I hope we can pull this off. I mean, he was directing the formation of something called Project Molecule, which was the internal code name for the massive financial structure that eventually became known as the Global Health Investment Fund. Now, this is a partnership between JP Morgan and the Gates Foundation to create a permanent apparatus that would A, surveil the developing world for pathogen outbreaks, B, create and deploy vaccines, C, operate through an offshore structure with donor anonymity, and provide investors with some legal form of protection. Does it sound far-fetched? Here's another email on the matter between Epstein and Gates. Let's read it. I'll get more detailed answers, but for now, I'm not sure what you mean by R&D. No input from the foundation into investments? Donors can choose from either a custom-made portfolio or a choice of silos and be able to switch. A mutual fund concept. Most initially, this should be American. However, we should be ready with an offshore arm, especially for vaccines. The donor-advised limits influence regarding grants, but allows great flexibility on investments. Anonymity is varied. Why do you need anonymity? Why do you need an offshore arm? What the hell were they planning to do? Well, I think we learned. So what would be sold to us as disaster mitigation was disaster profiteering. They were literally architecting a structure to financialize and militarize public health. And Epstein, he positioned himself as the connector, right? The guy who could access sovereign wealth funds, ultra high net worth donors, Middle Eastern capital that Gates, at that time at least, couldn't reach on his own. And the centerpiece was a massive investment vehicle targeting $100 billion that would blend philanthropy with venture capital. And here's what the fund was going to do. It was going to invest in biotech and vaccine companies. It was going to finance drug development for diseases affecting the developing world, build a global pathogen surveillance network, deploy vaccines through unaccountable public-private partnerships, and of course, return profits to investors. This was the innovation, public health as an asset class. So disease prevention wasn't just medicine anymore. It became a portfolio strategy. Biosurveillance, vaccine production, distribution networks, all under one massive structure that answered to nobody but the investors, not governments. And here's how they planned to sell it. They built a simulation, a respiratory virus, just like the one that we eventually got, tearing through the globe. And of course, it didn't focus on the hospitals, didn't focus on the body count. It focused on the markets. They showed these billionaires a world where borders close, trade stops, supply chains collapse, and their personal fortunes evaporate overnight. So the pitch was not help us save lives. The pitch was, nice fortune you got there. Shame if a virus destroyed it. The deal, of course, had a double bottom line. Massive financial return plus portfolio protection. So why did the deal fall apart? Well, Epstein wanted a 0.3% management fee on a $100 billion fund. So that's $300 million a year just for being the guy who connected billionaires to Gates' science. To which both JP Morgan and Gates' team balked and eventually backed out, but not really, because the idea didn't die. They just cut Epstein out and they built it for themselves. So the concept that Epstein originally pitched materialized without him as the Global Health Investment Fund backed by the Gates Foundation and JP Morgan sans Epstein. The fund invests in biotech companies developing drugs and vaccines for diseases affecting the developing world. Shocker. Now, in 2017, at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Gates co-founded CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. The stated goal? Fund rapid vaccine development for known threats like MERS, which is Middle Eastern Respiratory Virus, and unknown threats they ominously called Disease X. And the specific aim? Shorten vaccine development timelines from years to months. Does that sound familiar? And when COVID hit, we were told it was a miracle that vaccines were developed in under a year. It wasn't a miracle. It was the system Gates built becoming operational. But you can't roll out a global health regime without controlling the narrative. Take a look.
You should have free speech, but if you're inciting violence, if you're causing people not to take vaccines, where are those boundaries that even the U.S. should, have rules? And then if you have rules, what is it? Is there some AI that encodes those rules because you have billions of activity and, if you catch it a day later, the harm is done.
Harm is done. And this is where Bill Gates becomes a primary financial pillar of what journalists now call the Censorship Industrial Complex.
Today, American taxpayers are unwittingly financing the growth and power of a censorship industrial complex run by America's scientific and technological elite, which endangers our liberties and democracy.
Gates is a major donor to two key censorship nodes, Gavi and the Atlantic Council. Now, Gavi is not just an NGO, it's a massive public-private partnership that functions as the world's central purchasing authority for vaccines in the developing world. Take a look.
Gavi's very innovative because it's constantly looking at the data. How do we make sure that these vaccines are always available? How do we maintain the cold chain? A lot of innovation there. How do we track the data to see what's the most efficient way to achieve our goal? The whole process of working with the country health systems with this deep understanding of where vaccines should be used, that's really revolutionized global health.
Governments, pharmaceutical companies, and NGOs all flow through Gavi. It aggregates global demand, negotiates bulk pricing, and controls vaccine distribution across dozens of countries. The Gates Foundation didn't merely contribute to Gavi, it launched it. It remains one of its largest funders, and it holds a permanent seat on its board. In other words, Gates doesn't just support vaccines, he helps govern the global vaccine market. Now, back to the Atlantic Council, which is home to something called the Digital Forensic Research Lab, or the DFRLab. And their stated mission is tracking online disinformation. Now, of course, records released through the Twitter files and the Facebook disclosures showed the DFRLab regularly submitting lists of suspicious accounts to social media companies, requesting moderation or, outright bans of COVID conspiracy theorists and anyone expressing vaccine hesitancy. So this is how the system actually operates. First, corporate power. Large multinational corporations whose controlling stakes are held by billionaires and institutional investors like Bill Gates lobby elected officials to shape policy in their favor. Second, you've got government constraint. So agencies like DHS or the State Department, they can't directly censor Americans. The First Amendment makes that illegal. So that function gets outsourced to NGOs and academia. Groups like the Atlantic Council and Gavi. Now, they do the monitoring. They generate reports and risk assessments and informal hit lists of alleged misinformation spreaders. And finally, those lists are quietly passed to Facebook, Twitter, Google, and other platforms. And those companies then remove accounts under the language of platform safety and community standards. No official orders, no visible government censorship, just a seamless pipeline. Corporate lobbying, government pressure, NGO validation, and platform enforcement. It's censorship laundering. Everybody maintains plausible deniability, everybody keeps their hands clean, and we're told it's all for our own good. Have you ever asked why we were so censored? I mean, is it so we would take the vaccine without pause? I mean, in part, but there's a lot more to it. You think they banned talk of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and vitamin D because they cared about misinformation? No, it wasn't because they posed some insane threat to society. It's because of a law called Emergency Use Authorization, or EUA. You legally cannot fast-track an experimental vaccine if there's an adequate, approved, and available alternative treatment. So, if ivermectin worked, their fast-tracked, multi-billion-dollar vaccine authorization would have been illegal. They didn't censor early treatments because they were dangerous. Ivermectin won a Nobel Prize. They use it to treat babies with scabies. Okay, the side effect profile of ivermectin was nominal. They had to crush the competition to clear the runway for the product they owned. Now, while we don't have a link connecting Gates directly to Wuhan yet, what we know now is that COVID-19 was not organic. This long-anticipated pandemic was manufactured through gain-of-function research in a lab and released somehow into Gen Pop for reasons we will never be able to confirm. However, there is some indication as to why this may have happened. Take a look. So we don't actually know who sent this correspondence to Jeffrey Epstein because that has been redacted, but we do absolutely know that it was a conversation between Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Gates. It says, "Cool, quadruple exclamation mark. I'm excited. Also, I've been thinking a lot about that question that you asked Bill Gates. How do we get rid of poor people as a whole? And I have an answer/comment regarding that for you. When can I call you today to discuss this?" Are you effing kidding me? How do you get rid of poor people? I mean, this is disgusting. It is obscene. It is outrageous. As we all sat here and wondered, like, hey, could it be a bioweapon? Could it have been on purpose? Could it have been to cull the population? We were told we were crazy. No. First it came from a wet market. Then it came from a lab, maybe sort of. Well, now all of the world's intelligence agencies pretty much confirmed that it has come from a lab because they were tinkering around with a pathogen that ended up killing millions of people. But when we all wondered, like, hey, Nishat, you did this on purpose. Oh, no, don't be bananas. And yet, you have these two psychopaths trying to figure out how to get rid of the world's poor people. But here's the literal smoking gun. Event 201, held October 18th, 2019 in New York City, approximately 6 weeks before the first person with COVID went to the hospital in China. So the Gates Foundation partners with Johns Hopkins and the World Economic Forum to host Event 201, which is a tabletop exercise that simulated a coronavirus pandemic.
These epidemic events are getting more and more disruptive to health and to economy. And the reason we called it Event 201 is we knew eventually one of those days, one of those events would be the big one. If we are going to get ready, we need to have operationalized and integrated public-private cooperation that we haven't seen before.
6 weeks before the first person with COVID goes to the hospital, okay? The scenario they simulate involves a virus called CAPS, Coronavirus-Associated Pulmonary Syndrome. So this made-up virus starts in pigs in Brazil, jumps to humans, spreads via air travel, Mild symptoms for some, severe pneumonia for others. Now, the simulation predicts that 65 million will be dead within 18 months, and there'll be a total economic collapse. Now, this wasn't a medical drill. The participants weren't doctors or nurses. They were corporate executives, UPS, Johnson & Johnson, government officials. And the exercise focused on coordinating government and businesses to maintain supply chains and control information, specifically suppressing misinformation and disinformation during a pandemic.
We're at a moment where the social media platforms have to step forward and recognize the moment to assert that they're a technology platform and not a broadcaster is over. They, in fact, have to be a participant in broadcasting accurate information and partnering with the scientific and health communities to counterweight, if not flood the zone of accurate information, because to try to put the genie back in the bottle of the misinformation and disinformation is nigh impossible.
They strategized about media companies partnering with governments to control the narrative, and as stated, they'd already built the apparatus to do so with Gavi and the Atlantic Council's DFRLab. Now, 8 weeks later, COVID-19 emerged in Wuhan and became known to the general public. Johns Hopkins rushes out with a statement, oh, hey, Event 201 was just a training exercise. We didn't predict COVID. No, of course you didn't. Let's accept that. Why not? But here's the question. Why did the actual COVID response look like a coordinated wealth transfer instead of a public health protection exercise? Exactly as planned by Jeff Epstein in 2011. Event 201 wasn't a prediction. It was a rehearsal, and we all lived through opening night. This isn't a conspiracy, it's continuity. But wait, it gets worse, because after COVID, Gates actually had the balls to release a book, How to Prevent the Next Pandemic. And in it, he proposed the GERM team, a global epidemic response and mobilization squad, a permanent force of 3,000 experts managed by the WHO on standby to deploy at any outbreak within days at the cost of only $1 billion per year. This lunatic wants a standing army. He wants a global health militia accountable to no elected government, funded by Gates, controlled by the WHO. He's not even hiding it anymore. And in the event that you still think Gates is a sweet old man who wants to give away his fortune and save children in Africa, let's look at the SEC filings. Let's just follow the money. COVID wasn't a tragedy for the Gates Foundation. It was a windfall. On top of the insane profit that he made from the jump off of all of his biotech companies, they soared in stock price. Here's the receipt that most people never see. In the late summer of 2019, just months before any of us ever heard the word Wuhan, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation made a $55 million equity investment in a small German biotech company called BioNTech. Now, at the time, BioNTech wasn't even on the radar, right? But then the pandemic hits, the world shuts down. BioNTech partners with Pfizer to roll out the very first mRNA vaccine. Of course, the stock goes nuclear, climbing from $18 a share to over $400 a share. That's a 20x investment. Just that one investment took Gates $55 million to $1.1 billion. So ask yourself, what would a philanthropist do? Hold the stock, donate the shares, use the leverage to make the vaccine free and open to the world, but not Bill. Do you know any charity that operates like a hedge fund? It's insane. But the stock profit isn't even the worst part. Let's talk about Oxford. So early in the pandemic, Oxford researchers publicly said they wanted their COVID vaccine to be open, non-exclusive, and available for anyone to manufacture. No monopolies, no patents, all global public good. Reporting later showed the Gates Foundation urged Oxford to abandon that plan and instead sign an exclusive deal with AstraZeneca. The open model died, Big Pharma won, and the world went back to scarcity pricing. Then came the TRIPS waiver, a proposal to let poorer countries manufacture their own vaccines. Well, Gates, He publicly opposed that. And he went on TV and he argued against sharing the technologies.
Will the United States back a patent waiver? Team Biden said it has nothing to share on this front. And it's not just governments, by the way, who are putting patents over lives. Even individuals who make up the global elite are championing the cause of big pharma. The likes of Bill Gates, the billionaire philanthropist, believes vaccine formula should not be shared with the developing world. He gave the statement on Sunday. Bill Gates was asked if it would be helpful for intellectual property protections to be lifted. How did he respond? With an emphatic no.
There's been some speculation that the changing intellectual property rules and allowing these vaccines, as you say, the recipe for these vaccines to be shared would be helpful. Do you think that would be helpful?
No.
Why not?
Well, there's only so many vaccine factories in the world, and people are very serious about the safety of vaccines. And so moving something that had never been done, moving a vaccine from, say, a J&J factory into a factory in India, that it's novel. It's only because of our grants and our expertise that can happen at all. The thing that's holding things back in this case is not intellectual property. There's not like some idle vaccine factory with regulatory approval that makes magically safe vaccines. You've got to do the trials on these things, and every manufacturing process has to be looked at in a very careful way.
So while developing nations begged for access, supply stayed controlled and monopolized, arguably to protect his profits. Now I want to look at the other side of his portfolio, Microsoft. So while Gates was urging lockdowns, while small businesses closed and schools went remote, the entire world was pushed into digital infrastructure. Teams, Azure, Zoom, cloud services. Microsoft surged through the pandemic. So Gates didn't just benefit from the solution. He benefited from the actual shutdown. While your small business was being crushed by lockdowns, while you were forbidden from saying goodbye to your dying grandmother, your kids couldn't go to school, Bill Gates' net worth exploded. You went broke, he went into orbit. The guy's like an arsonist who lit the fire, blocks the exits, and then sold us all the water at a premium. And all of this madness was inspired by a convicted pedophile. We may not be able to stop evil people from doing evil things, but we can expose them. We can boycott them. We can demand accountability. Every dollar that you spend is a vote. Every share is pressure. Every question weakens the grip. They count on silence. They count on fatigue, and they count on us giving up. Don't. Until the truth fully comes out. In the words of Anonymous, which is painfully apropos in this moment, Bill Gates, remember this. We don't forgive. We don't forget. Expect us. Okay, next up, I want to look at some of the more outlandish claims. Are these guys actually eating children? Are they actually drinking blood? There is one thing that does not fully add up. The Adrenochrome conspiracy. I'm going to break that one down for you in detail so you can make up your own mind. Small businesses are the backbone of the American economy, but getting funding from traditional banks is an uphill battle. Of the 36 million small businesses in the United States, over 70% report needing additional capital every year. And while revenue is at an all-time high, big banks are tightening standards and approving fewer loans than ever, leaving owners stuck with mountains of paperwork. But if you want bank rates without the bank delays, check out cardiff.co/Jillian for up to $500,000 in same-day funding. Cardiff is the largest privately held small business lender in the United States, having funded over $12 billion since 2004. Their application takes less than 5 minutes. It has no impact on your personal credit, and approvals happen in minutes with same-day funding. Banks try to lock out small businesses. Cardiff has the key. Big banks may not want to approve your business loans, but Cardiff does. So if you've been in business for at least a year and you're pulling in $20,000 a month in revenue, apply now for up to $500,000 in same-day business funding at cardiff.co/Jillian. Again, that's cardiff.co/Jillian. Real growth, fast funding, Cardiff, borrow better. All right, guys, let's face it. Fast fashion falls apart fast. And high-end brands charge insane prices for logo hype. And honestly, it's insulting, which is just one of the reasons I'm obsessed with Quince. These guys deliver elevated essentials, timeless pieces built for effortless layering, mixing, and the clothes last season after season. I mean, my Quince leather jacket is soft, it's perfectly structured, it looks sharp, and it's ideal for everyday wearing. I mean, I've put big money on luxury jackets, and my Quince outperforms them all for a fraction of the cost. And they do it by skipping the middleman. They work directly with ethical factories so that we get premium materials and craftsmanship without the markup or the baloney. So think 100% organic cotton sweaters that feel amazing, premium stretch denim for all-day comfort, luxe cashmere that's soft and not itchy. Gotta hate itchy sweaters. And 100% European linen that breathes and endures. So stop settling and refresh your wardrobe with Quince. Don't wait. Go to quince.com/Jillian for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/Jillian to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/Jillian. All right, let's be honest. The math is just not adding up lately between the grocery store and the skyrocketing insurance premiums. Even with a steady job, more families are being forced to rely on high-interest credit cards to cover expenses. If you're a homeowner and you're caught in that cycle, carrying balances with interest rates in the 20s or even the 30s, it's time to get some relief. And right now, mortgage rates are at a 3-year low. And my friends at American Financing are helping homeowners pay off that high-interest debt at rates in the low 5s. Their salary-based mortgage consultants don't just push loans. They build exit strategies from debt. And on average, they're saving their customers $800 a month. Plus, if you start today, you might even delay the next 2 mortgage payments. There's no upfront fees or obligations. So to find out how much you can save, America's home for home loans is American Financing. Just call 866-891-4811. That's 866-891-4811 or visit americanfinancing.net/Jillian. All right, let me take a second to unpack something that's been circulating on the internet around Epstein and his cabal of celebs and elites. These people are despicable and they're gross, okay? So let me preface by saying that. But the idea that a chemical called adrenochrome is this ultra-rare secret drug harvested from people, especially kids, for blood-based immortality or intense highs is baloney, guys. It's not true. So hear me out. I'm going to prove it to you. And I know this topic can trigger a strong emotional reaction, especially because it touches on real issues that we all care about, right? Exploitation, power, inequality, and the fear that elites are doing things behind closed doors that are horrifying, which is true, but it doesn't make every horror story you hear true. So for the sake of sanity, let's break this down honestly. First, let's talk about what adrenochrome actually is. Adrenochrome is simply a chemical byproduct that forms when adrenaline, which is a stress hormone, oxidizes. That's it. Your body naturally creates it in tiny amounts anytime that you're under stress. So there's nothing mystical about it. Now, back in the 1950s, researchers explored a hypothesis that maybe adrenochrome played a role in schizophrenia. And they even gave small doses to volunteers, but the results were underwhelming. They had mild anxiety and they had headaches, they had brain fog, discomfort. There was no euphoria, no visions, no life-changing experiences. And that theory was subsequently dropped. Now, here's something important that rarely gets mentioned. Adrenochrome is an oxidation product. So in plain English, it's associated with oxidative stress. That's the same process that damages cells and accelerates aging and contributes to inflammation and degenerative disease. So biologically speaking, adrenochrome is far more likely very harmful than helpful. It does not regenerate tissue. It does not reverse aging. Doesn't upgrade the brain. Think of it like cellular exhaust, okay? Now, here's where the real mythology got started. So before Hunter S. Thompson wrote about it in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, fiction had already started shaping the idea that this was some sort of miracle drug. So in 1962, Anthony Burgess referenced a fictional version of adrenochrome called Adrenochrome, right? So this was in Clockwork Orange, and it was added to drugged milk, and it was meant to sharpen violent impulses. This, of course, came from the previously debunked hypothesis that it could have been linked to schizophrenia, right? Now, that was the first step, right? Turning a dull chemical into a stylized literary drug. Then Thompson took it further, and in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, adrenochrome is portrayed as a superdrug supposedly taken from a living human body. And that harvesting detail was invented purely for shock value. It's satire. It's a storytelling device meant to make the scene darker and more depraved. It's not actual science. And then decades later, when this idea resurfaced online, fiction stopped being treated like fiction. And once something feels emotionally plausible, the details, they start to matter less, right, than the story itself. Because there's fear, there's outrage, and there's a sense that powerful people are exploiting the vulnerable. And I get it, right? That emotional pattern, that's real. But here's the part that most people don't realize. This modern adrenochrome narrative did not appear in a vacuum. It quietly plugged into something much older, a medieval conspiracy known as blood libel. Now, this is the false claim that the Jewish people secretly kidnapped or harmed children to use their blood for rituals or power. And that lie goes back hundreds of years in Europe, and it was used to justify violence, pogroms, and mass persecution. So fast forward to today, and the language has changed. Right now it's global elites and shadow networks or Hollywood, but the core story is eerily similar. Powerful hidden groups harvesting children for secret biological benefits. Most people repeating this don't realize that they're echoing a narrative that's been recycled for centuries. And it does not mean that they're hateful. It means that an ancient myth got repackaged with modern buzzwords and internet aesthetics. And here's something important to acknowledge without conflating it with adrenochrome. Okay, there are legitimate medical and longevity practices involving blood and blood products from young people, no less. Scientists are openly studying things like albumin, which is a blood protein involved in inflammation and aging, cord blood stem cells used clinically for certain cancers and immune disorders, plasma-based therapies that are published, regulated, and debated in medical journals. None of this is actually secret, guys. None of it's underground, and none of it involves harvesting children in basements. It's actually mainstream research. The adrenochrome conspiracy blends three things: an abandoned 1950s medical hypothesis, a fictional drug from novels, and a centuries-old fear narrative about hidden power. So when you look under the hood, the chemistry itself is painfully simple and painfully boring. And here's the nail in this conspiracy theory's coffin. There's no need to harvest adrenochrome because it's exceptionally easy to synthesize in a lab. In fact, you can buy it online right now for $55 for research purposes. Conspiracy stories often stick not because of facts, but because of fear, uncertainty, and the feeling of being shut out of real power and real information. And that feeling is justified. But attaching it to fictional chemicals and cinematic villains actually weakens us, because when we chase myths, we stop organizing around reality. We stop demanding transparency. We stop pressuring lawmakers. We stop following the money. And that's exactly what benefits the people who are already winning. If we want to change the future, we do not need fantasies, guys. We need focus. We need civic engagement. We need consumer power. We need to vote. Organize, expose corruption, support watchdog journalism, hold institutions accountable, not post and argue over made-up super drugs. There are real systems exploiting real people in real time, and that's where the fight is.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. And make sure to let me know what guests you want to see on in the future.